Hello, this is Todd Kudik. This is my new channel, Making Your Business Soar, from the DD Network, Dev Dimensions and Dev Dynamics Network. I would like to use this network to show you ways that you can improve your business, improve your organization using technology, management techniques, and planning techniques that many people haven't thought of. So let's get started. Hi again. This is Todd Kudik. As I said earlier, I'm the president and founder of Dev Dimensions and Dev Dynamics. This network is going to focus on how to make your business, how you make your organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a government organization, any sort of organization, more effective, more efficient, using some ideas that I have developed over 35 years, supporting the military, the Defense Department, management, NASA, and mostly the intelligence community. How can you improve? Most businesses have all sorts of issues that they want to address. They may be profitable, but they may not be doing the best they can be doing. Or, worse yet, they may not be adapting to a lot of change in political, technological, and social environments. Let me give you a little bit of background about myself. I have a master's degree in systems management from the University of Southern California and am a graduate or an alum of the Viterbi School of Engineering, formerly the Institute of Safety and Systems Management at USC. I have a bachelor's degree in social and industrial psychology from Rutgers University. I have a postgraduate certificate in enterprise resource planning from Regis University. I was a certified Scrum Master, a certified health information systems specialist, and have my expert systems engineering designation from INCOSE. I served for 6 years as an active duty officer in the Air Force, working on communications and satellite systems, and then continued on as a contractor supporting many of the same organizations that I did while I was on active duty. I have a lot of experience dealing with policy issues, governance issues, technology issues, management issues, anything that the government dealt with. I can assure you most organizations deal with too. So I want to get started, but first I just want to caveat or make one small caveat. I am not a professional broadcaster. This is my first shot at it, so there may be some pregnant pauses during my conversation. Bear with me as I improve hopefully over time and become a better broadcaster to keep you informed of what is important in your organization. The first topic I want to talk about are complex systems. People hear the word complex, they generally take a pretty dim view of that word. But actually, complexity is a good thing, it's not a bad thing. What they really confuse is the concept of complication versus complexity. Well, fundamentally, what's the difference? A complicated system is rigid and brittle. It's non-adaptive. It can't change to changing environments, changing inputs. As a result, when environments change, their systems start to fail, they break, they become less efficient. The complex system, on the other hand, is highly adaptive. It is more than the sum of its parts. So when its environment changes, it adapts. In biology, systems tend to be very adaptive, and if they're complex, they're more than the sum of their parts. To give you an example, in a rather morbid way, think of a dead person versus a living person. A dead person is a complicated system that can't adapt to anything. You can take it apart, it is exactly the sum of its parts. But a living person is a complex system. It can adapt to change. When its environment changes, it adapts. It's more than the sum of its parts. Organizations need to be built the same way. I'm going to show you a slide here and let you look at what a complicated organizational system is. As you can see, we have different pieces. We have an international piece, we have a company piece, we have a retail piece, we have a finance piece, we have a consumer piece, and each one exists in its own stovepipe. They don't communicate with one another very well. They communicate across to each one of its specialized inputs. So say, for example, the financial department only communicates with the financial organization. It also may inform other stovepipes in the organization, but it does so in a different way. As a result, information is non-adaptive, it's not easily translated, and it's not well understood by the organization as a whole. The system is broken. When something changes, the whole system can come crashing down. What we want to do is change ourselves into a, well, before I go into that, I just want to go into my next slide here. As an example, we're going to look at a bank enterprise. This is a little bit older slide. This goes back a few years ago when this was probably more of a problem, and I think with cloud computing, which will be a subject for another lecture, it's a little less relevant, but I think a lot of organizations still suffer from these stovepipes. As you can see, we have multiple silos. Each one is communicating independently with its external inputs and handles each one differently. There's no cross-pollination between the silos. Everything stays shut down. When I was in the intelligence community, this was both a problem and a design feature. It was or in the IT world, we would say it was a bug and a design feature. The bug, of course, led to intelligence failures that resulted in 9/11. The feature aspect of it was that it was very, very good at protecting information from being exfiltrated by hostile actors. So nobody really knew what the big picture was. They knew their silo, and even if that silo was compromised, the rest of the organization was safe. Unfortunately, that double-edged sword can lead to problems. Organizations often evolve the same way. Businesses evolve the same way. They evolve stovepipes, not by design, but by accident. And these are not adaptive. So it becomes a huge problem for changing environments. And I think today we see a lot of that going on. There are, let's think about the change going on. We have political change, we have economic change, we have government policy change, we have technology change, we have social change. Everything is changing, but our systems are not designed to adapt to that. And those brittle systems will break. So one piece of an organization may thrive in that changed environment, but the others may do quite poorly. A good example might be the auto industry. If you look at General Motors, which evolved over many, many years into multiple lines of very similar products targeted at different markets, there was limited cross-communication in many areas, although from an engineering standpoint, there was a tremendous amount of sharing, with Chevys and Cadillacs being built as essentially the same car, with huge price differentials, resulting in neither one doing particularly well. You look at a company like Toyota, which initially just started off with one line and then expanded into a second line, their Lexus division. It was a much simpler architecture, much more adaptive. As oil prices changed, they were able to adapt. So when oil became cheaper, they were able to produce heavier, bigger, more powerful vehicles. When oil became more expensive, they still had a place for a significant market share in the small car arena. GM could not adapt to that, along with many other problems, of course, in terms of pensions and union contracts. GM eventually was forced to file bankruptcy about 9 years ago, and has since recovered fairly well. But it had to slim down a lot and remove a lot of those stovepipes. I'm going to go on to another slide here. What I want to show you is the patch that has been done, that was done, to help bridge the gap of the stovepipe problem. So in the aughts and even into fairly recently, to some extent currently, one of the big ways to break down stovepipes was to build some middleware layer that contained all the data that everybody could share. So everybody, all the external inputs were feeding data in, the silos were pulling information out, and the silos were better equipped through middleware to manage that data, to interpret that data, and to share data so they can make more uniform decisions and, as a result, become more adaptable. Over time, we have moved more and more into a cloud architecture where, oh, look at this, these silos are now together, and the corporate data resides in a cloud. What's a cloud? A cloud is not that thing that floats up in the sky that produces rain. The cloud is a place where you can store your data and your applications so everybody shares them across the board. Everybody's looking at the same thing the same way and can make unified decisions. As a result, the organization can adapt very quickly to changes in the environment. A number of years ago, I was working at the MITRE Corporation and did a briefing on slime molds and complex systems in the context of agile development. Agile development is a software methodology, or it's a family of software methodologies that rely on adaptive, complex systems to help build software. I'm not going to go into the details of that now, but my comparison of slime molds to complex systems and human systems was quite simple. If you know what a slime mold is, it kind of lives in wooded areas, and it's a bunch of independent cells. They have no intelligence for all intents and purposes, yet they behave as a single system without having any cognizance that they're doing so. in many ways, human organizations do the same thing. They will behave as individuals, but those individuals with proper interaction with the individuals around it will start to behave in more efficient, adaptable ways. Well, slime molds do the same thing. Slime molds are able to move to sources of nutrition in unison. They are able to lower their metabolism when the environment becomes more hostile and moisture and food become less available. They reproduce according to the availability of materials to survive on. So they behave like an integrated system, even though they're not. And organizations need to learn to do the same thing. This is not necessarily an easy thing to do, because most organizations tend to be run as top-down hierarchical entities. And as a result, their ability to adapt is constrained by the management above them. The New Mexico Complexity Institute, I believe, Yanir Bar-Yam, who is a researcher there, wrote a book on complex systems, points out that the more hierarchical your system, your organization, the less adaptive it is. It just can't move because the hierarchy constrains that ability to change. And we see that in a lot of industries today. I read in the news yesterday, I believe, Cummins Engines in Indiana is dealing with the tariffs that are being put on steel and the counter tariffs that are being placed on their exports. As a result, they've already started layoffs of people, and they are putting on hold plans for further expansion because not only have costs gone up, but their market has dropped. So they are going through some significant change right now, dealing with the fallout of some the administration's policy decisions on imports and exports. They are, to a great extent, a legacy organization, and their response to adapt is, well, slice off people, slice off organizations, cut research and development. This morning I read an interesting story that would counter that approach, which is really an austerity approach. And that is the case of Portugal, which suffered tremendously during the Great Recession. Just like Cummins is using austerity to adapt, much of the European Union was ordered by the IMF to use austerity to stop the hemorrhaging of countries like Greece and Portugal during the recession. Well, Portugal decided to go in the opposite direction. They did not use austerity. They took the limited resources they had and they deployed them in ways that have helped the economy of Portugal tremendously. So it avoided the worst of what Greece went through and has come out looking very, very good economically, from new businesses and technology, and the use of technology in traditional businesses such as farming, retraining people, higher wages, and lower unemployment. So they adapted using a complex systems approach that violated the hierarchical approach that Cummins is using, and what the IMF and the European Union was using to try to get its weaker members back into the black financially. that's a really good example of how a complicated system versus a complex system can be compared in the real world. So the idea is sometimes is going against the grain. You're an organization that sees its market change. Well, what are you going to do? You know, you have a real issue here. You need to adapt to the new market. What do you do now if you're a soybean farmer in the Midwest and China has now put 25% tariffs on your soybeans? You have to adapt. You don't just cut back your growth. You better start exploring your opportunities in other countries, or come up with new opportunities to rebrand your product, so you can create new markets to offset the losses that you're going to experience when your major export market is dramatically changed. That is how you go about adapting your organization. But that means you need to look at technology, you need to look at, it means thinking out of the box. Unlike slime molds, where the individual members can't think out of the box, but they behave in a mutually beneficial way, humans can think out of the box. So we should be more adaptive. Unfortunately, we often are not. And that, to me, is a huge competitive problem. Government goes through the same thing. I said this earlier, you know, the stovepiping of the intelligence community, as an example, is a good example of creating rigid, brittle systems that can't adapt to changing threats. The system was designed to help protect itself from external threats, but that compromised its mission. It needed to find, you know, a better middle ground to resolve that conflict. Much of that has been through more advanced encryption techniques, better security, without having to compromise the movement of information from one organization to another. So you're a business. What are you going to do? How do you change? How do you break down your stovepipes? Well, you know, that's often easier said than done, because stovepipes tend to be self-protecting entities. They don't want to lose manpower. They don't want to lose budget. They don't want to lose control, power, influence, whatever. And they see themselves, as many children do, unfortunately, as the center of the universe. They're not. And part of that is is where management, the corner office, needs to start breaking down the stovepipes. This is one case where hierarchy does pay off, because the hierarchy, the top of the hierarchy, can demand change. And in order to make that happen, it has to order the divisions, the stovepipes, whatever you want to call those, to start communicating, to break down walls, and to work together. And you know, obviously, with the threat of that team, that stovepipe, going away if they don't comply, and in fact may be needed to get rid of some stovepipes. They may be unnecessary. But if the organization is going to survive as a whole, the individual units, whether they be divisions, stovepipes within those divisions, or even individuals, need to adapt as well. Oftentimes that requires somebody coming in, working with both the management and the teams to set up goals, to start facilitating cross-pollination, and the process will be painful, will take a lot of time, and will ruffle many feathers along the way. But at the same time, if the survival of the organization is paramount, those things have to be done. One more slide that I just want to show here, and we can see here how we can build that business architecture, everything from systems to data, all the way up to the pinnacle of the business architecture with feedback mechanisms and the necessary feedback mechanisms to survive. So the basic business architecture has, and this is the top-down approach, the business architecture, which to a great extent is done at the top levels of the organization, needs to inform information architecture, this information systems architecture, the data architecture, and ultimately systems that make the organization work. But not only I mentioned hardware and software in this diagram, but communications. What's communications? Communications are people talking to one another. That means software that can facilitate that, telephones, emails, whatever, and people meeting face to face. Those lines of communications need to remain open in order to break down those stovepipes and move the organization from a brittle, complicated system to an adaptive, complex system. So that's a little background on complicated versus complex systems, how they can affect your organization, what is important for you to consider. Obviously, there are opportunities for expertise to come in to help organizations do that, but the reality is many organizations, if they want to put some money and effort into it on their own, can easily build internal consulting teams to do that. And oftentimes that's the best way to do it because now everybody has ownership. External consultants, they sit there, they facilitate meetings, and believe me, I've done this many times, but at the end of the day, people don't feel like they have ownership of these changes, and as a result, the final deliverable multi-page report of things that you need to do just gets shelved, and everybody sort of walks away from it, and the status quo remains. And then when some earth-shaking event happens to their company, they can't adapt. And then they say, oh, we should have listened. Well, you can't now because the event's already occurred. You can't change things in the past. Or as I like to say, you can't drive a car through the rearview mirror. I want to thank you for listening to my conversation. I hope I've given you some things to think about. I hope that you start moving your organization from a complicated system to a complex system that can adapt to rapid change. I'm here for questions. Don't hesitate to email me at tkudik@devdimensions.com. That's Todd at devdimensions.com. And hopefully I will be hearing from everybody soon. I look forward to our next opportunity to speak, and hopefully you will learn something new in my next session.